Hello everybody, and welcome back to Writing the Rapids, the show where I, Joe Bielecki, talk to writers about writing. Very often those writers have been recommended to me by writers who have previously been on the show, or it's a Rejoinder episode and my guest has themselves previously been on the show. In the case of this Rejoinder episode guest, it's Rick Claypool. He writes absurdist horror. He is the author of Skull, Slime, Tentacle, Witch War from Anxiety Press 2024, which is the book of discussion today. Also, Tentacle Head, Bear Creek Press, 2022, The Mold Farmer, 6 Gallery Press, 2020, and Leech Girl Lives, Space Boy Books. Rick has also put out short stories that have appeared here and there online, including in Had, Maudlin House, and Back Patio Press. He grew up in the industrial outskirts of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, lives in Rhode Island, and spends as much time as he can in the woods looking for fungi and slime molds. Before we get into the meat of the episode, I will remind you very gently that you can become a patron of the show at patreon.com/noisemakerjoe. For $2 a month, you can get these episodes about a day earlier than everybody else. You can also tip me, I guess. paypal.me/noisemakerjoe is where you can do that for a one-time donation. You can also buy my book. It's called Tired. It's on Amazon. It's pretty darn good. Also, like and subscribe. Or whatever you do at the place you listen to this, and talk about it on social media, that sort of thing. Now, without further ado, let's get into my conversation with Rick Claypool. Something that I noticed maybe a little over halfway through the book, and maybe this probably says more about me than anything else, but I was like, oh, no, this world has rules. Like, it's wacky, right? It's absurdist. And so throughout the first half or so, things were happening kind of unexpectedly and without a kind of sense or logic to it in some cases. But then the deeper into the book you go, it's not like it gets reined in, but you start to see the boundaries of the world that you've created and how certain things link up. There's still a lot of mystery and chaos within the structure of the world, but I feel like I got a sort of sense of how things work, which was cool, because usually when I go into something bizarro coded, my brain defaults to this is going to be not that. Like, not, I don't know, rigid feels wrong and structured feels wrong, but like self-contained, I guess. And I'm wondering if maybe if you agree with that take.
Well, I mean, I appreciate that. I mean, it's on purpose that as you proceed through the book, the scale of it starts to sort of zoom out in a way where there are some underlying systems that are in place, and I don't know. I very purposefully don't explain any of that, but it's reassuring to me to to hear you say that this sort of like there's a bit of a click of understanding that, oh, like this things that are happening, and they might seem, it's not randomness for the sake of randomness. Like there is a sort of a purposeful structure here.
Yeah. One of the things that I feel like I've been pretty clear about in the past, particularly with your first two books, is the again, social commentary feels like a dirty term, but you you are putting things in your books that mirror real life, that let me know that you and I are on very similar wavelengths as people with regard to the real world. That I was wondering if maybe as you get more absurdist, if maybe some of that was going to just not be quite so front and center. But again, wasn't. There's stuff in there that it's like, oh, okay, yeah. And once I made that connection is actually when I started to kind of understand the world more. Yeah, I don't know how much you want to say about any of that.
Well, I mean, I'm okay with not understanding it. I'm okay with understanding it. I'm okay with understanding, parts of it. I mean, I guess it's, I mean, it's a, you get just a sense like all these are, that there's a greater society that the characters, that their world is sort of excluded from, that the world is I don't know is the ways in which it is twisted and distorted and fucked up are ways that are not all that unlike the world in which we exist. But I know there are a few things I hate more. Not hate is a strong word, but like that, it's like it takes you out of a book whenever things feel didactic, right? Whenever it's like, oh, this book is about this stuff, and it's also trying to say, and therefore you should feel this way about this thing, and this is not that. But it, a lot of the it's a lot of it's my nightmare cartoon dissociative fugue of the things that have been going on for the past several years, all sort of mixed and mashed up with more of a focus on my own personal mental health struggles, depression and feeling overwhelmed. I mean, it's basically autofiction, but and then I don't know. It's about those things, but it's also escapist. It's a little bit just thinking about the worst case scenarios of things that can happen and drenching them in slime and making them I don't know, not terrifying so much. It's still upsetting, but just trying to process just this being fucked up people in a fucked up world, and trying to do things and failing and failing and failing, and that that sense of just being lost in a world that is beyond one's control, but still trying to just perform simple tasks, and you sometimes you are so upset about things you feel like you gotta puke, and your puke kills people. Sometimes you try to kill yourself and you accidentally clone yourself.
Who among us?
Right.
Sometimes you find a baby in a bottle of soda. Um, yeah, I really wanted to give Tentacle Head a hug several times throughout this book. I've mentioned on occasion here, sometimes someone will write a character and and I'll be like, oh man, I can tell this character is not supposed to be liked. And that's really uncomfortable because that character has a lot of qualities that I either have or used to have. And that feels very bad. Tentacle Head and Skullface are definitely not necessarily written to be disliked. But there's still a lot of that where it's like, oh yeah, oh boy, oh yeah, poor guy, oh man. I guess it in a way it was kind of healing because it, all of the set dressing is so absurd that when they get kind of belligerently upset, it's less embarrassing. Like it makes sense that just in this world, getting upset looks like that. And the narration goes all caps, and sometimes you just scream and stuff, and like that felt nice. There's an element of childhoodedness to this book that I appreciated because you are able to I don't know, look at, yourself the way you were a while ago, or maybe not so much of a while ago, and just be like, okay, you know what? It's sometimes acting like that is actually appropriate. I also want to mention that this book was at the beginning particularly difficult for me because I do have a thing with vomiting.
Sorry.
It's, like I don't have a lot of triggers, man. But yeah, when I was like 7, I had the stomach flu or food poisoning or something on Christmas, and I just can't do it anymore, man. Like, it surprises me that, baby spit up is different, I think. Because like I had said to my wife at some point, like, oh yeah, I can do anything except that. And she's like, well, no, like these past several times that the kid has vomited or spit up or whatever, you were able to clean it up and be fine. But yeah, man, I've such a hard time with it anywhere. In film, if I like hear it in like a rap song skit from the 90s, because that was all over the place. And apparently even in text. But I don't blame you for that. Okay. What it did do though is it colored my experience that brownish soda, instead of reading to me like Pepsi or Coke, read to me like Jankum. Okay, so Jankum is like an internet urban myth of like fermented feces in like in a pop bottle. And there's pictures on the internet.
Oh, damn.
And so it's, it's brownish, but it looks more like Yoo-hoo than soda. And because my stomach was already turning, brownish soda didn't read to me like Coca-Cola, and it read to me instead like this feces liquor.
Well,
that there's really nothing I can say to turn this into any sort of literary conversation, anything. That was just my experience as a reader.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, it makes me want to say like, well, it's like you could go somewhere with like, it's like the brown note, but like of literature, if like you could achieve that. But that's
I don't know. That's all I got. So obviously your entire oeuvre is colored by your mycological interest. And I think last time we kind of talked about that in and of itself. But I'm curious, like, if you're going out and mushroom hunting, is like directly tied to your writing, or if it's like, do you go out and you see a slime mold and you're like, ah, yes, that is how I need to describe a character? Or is it just because you're consuming, these images while you're going outside and looking for these things? It's just like in there and then just kind of naturally comes out because it's a part of you as a person.
I mean, it's something that I draw inspiration from in a couple of ways. In part, just because it is, finding and identifying interesting, strange, sometimes completely, mold covered and riddled with worms, mushrooms, and learning things about slime molds and things like that. So all that is, I mean, there's a couple level. I mean, there's on one level is like there are processes like that I'm aware of that I draw inspiration from that I feel like are just interesting natural processes that I can sort of can think about. I know some people have like a mind for like engineering or for machines or how those kinds of things work. I extremely do not. But I have always had this sort of amateur fascination with biology and with life forms of various flavors, and so thinking about in particular the way slime molds, which are not actually fungi, I have to say, they're the scientific term is myxomycetes. They are more like amoebas that join together like to form giant crawling blobs that are like a big sort of, it's like one organism, but it's also like many organisms. And then they, in the natural situation, they don't really die. They just transform into these, what looks like, I don't know, they can look like all kinds of strange things, and the multicolored lumps. They can be really wildly like candy colored yellows and pinks and oranges and all kinds of things. And for no apparent reason. And so just the fact of that, they're extremely ephemeral. So all these things together just make them extremely fascinating to me as just sort of like a mode of life. And there are ways in which I feel like I can sort of see, that as a metaphorically, the way like these kinds of living things exist that are, I don't know, that make me think of things that people do, or make me think of things that people do like sometimes on an individual level, sometimes on a societal level. And I don't know. I just think those little creatures are neat. And then, but also, I mean, just like on another level, like I am also just off like on a tactical, tactile level. I'm often like I am actually picking mushrooms and feeling the various textures that they can have, and sometimes and like using that and figuring out if they are is this like a good fresh mushroom, or is it that I've found in the woods, or is it completely hollowed out by maggots, and or is it like halfway hollowed out by maggots, and I can like save the good half. All of that is it gives just the experience of that gives me a very deep well to draw on for thinking about I don't know, upsetting textures potentially, or it's like, oh, like this is like I could think about trying to describe this but also like describe it in a I'm not describing a mushroom, I'm sort of describing a sort of body horror situation. and um, yeah, uh, it's just also it's just one of those things. Like this is a a good thing to do that gets me out in the world and off of the internet, and just reminds me that of all the like delightful things that are small and beautiful, and have no idea about all the like human bullshit happening in the world.
I like that. I like that a lot. I think in between probably the last time you were on and now, I read the Entangled Life by Merlin Sheldrake. Because he makes an appearance in one of my favorite nonfiction books about caves. And there was a lot of ink used in that book to talk about the mycelium and the sort of like, because mushrooms are just like, mushrooms are to fungus as apples are to tree or whatever.
Right.
And so a lot of that book was kind of focused on like the underground part of the fungus and how can the information travel so fast and sort of things like that. And so, there is, I think, maybe a cultural thesis within that book of like, what if we could communicate quicker and better and more clearly and about more important things. And the slime mold thing is interesting because really the only time I ever hear about it is from your social media postings. So I had no idea that it was like a completely different form of life in and of itself, which makes sense why you kind of mention it on its own so much. But obviously the character Slop is therefore sort of molded off of the slime mold phenomena.
Yes, yeah. He is an anthropomorphic, sentient slime mold slash socialist organization. Yeah, the thing about slime mold that it's almost become like my like I don't know, a little bit of like a theory of how society works, and I don't know, it's very much it's half baked, but it's interesting because one of the things that have been observed about slime molds is that under stressful conditions, a sort of single slime mold, which is also sort of a plural sort of thing, because it's made up of many individuals that came together, and then after they came together, they sort of grew and multiplied and became this sort of giant cell that is still sort of has many parts. In a stress situation, their response will polarize, where roughly, some of them will say, we're going to stop living and crawling around, and we're going to turn into the reproductive form, which is sort of like it's death, but it's also how they reproduce. Is they form these they're called sporangia. They're basically like, they look like tiny little mushrooms, so they're not, that's not what they are, but they're like, and they reproduce through spores, and then those spores are basically like little seeds that more baby amoeba slime molds will hatch out of eventually. In a stress situation, some of them do that, and some of them will stay in their slimy crawling form and just like try to hide away and survive in that way. Sometimes they can dry up in that state and remain viable and kind of go back to crawling around again. I think it's very interesting when it gives me, and it makes sense, right? As like a survival strategy, it's like we don't know which decision to make, so what if we'll just make both decisions, and one of them will work out, right? And so it's I don't know. I don't. I'm not making excuses for anyone making, horrible decisions, politically or otherwise. But I think it's interesting that just there is that, it's almost like a magnetic sort of quality, or the opposite of that. Sort of there's like this tendency to sort of like polarize. And sort of, well, if all these people are doing this thing, I'm going to do the opposite. I don't know. I feel like there's something to that on like a, I don't know, on like a, just,
on like a biological
deep, like, organism level that's like sub reptile brain, that is some kind of thing that that people do. I mean, it kind of makes me also like think of like you hear of the way that like the the toxoplasmosis parasite affects people's behavior, and like maybe that's why I'm a cat person. I don't know. Maybe maybe I just have this parasite in me that like makes me love cats, and I'm okay with that. But like, is the part of me okay with that? Okay with that in part because the parasite is like, this doesn't bother you, it's fine. So I don't know. I feel like there's I don't know.
Yeah, there's I think there's something to that, and I'm thinking of some like promo I heard for one of the NPR shows a while back that was talking about how like your gut bacteria has a lot more to do with your mental health than you might expect, and so and the fact that we are made up of a whole bunch of cells, and so me is actually we, is
right. And how much of what your brain does is just sort of like, kind of making narrative sense of all the sort of the decisions and impulses and identity of what you are. Like how much of that is just, is consciousness just like kind of, how much is consciousness? It's not like it's sort of like a construct, right? That is just being, imposed on the implausible plots that we're managing all the time.
I feel like I've mentioned this on the podcast before, probably when Charlene Elsby was on, that I had a professor one time who suggested that, or introduced the idea that like, what if the brain is just an antenna, that nobody in that class liked. Because he did not bring it up in a philosophy class full of philosophy majors. He brought it up in a communications class full of people who were in various communications majors, and they did not want to hear it.
Right. Well, they know how an antenna works anyway, right? People.
Right. Yeah. I don't want to get on a tangent about how broadcast engineering is not a class that broadcasting majors have to go through because it's an engineering thing, and how that was frustrating for me, but whatever. I've worked in radio for a decade, and I don't really know how radio works. It's, there's a larger something about something there.
Yep.
But yeah, no, I like this, I am drawn to the idea of people using fungus or fungus related things as a different mode for interpreting life, right? Like rather than just plant or animal or rock or whatever, to sort of do an animism with and make metaphors for how our life goes. Too often, maybe entirely, with very few exceptions, that usually just turns into people who are really into certain hallucinogenic drugs, which is frustrating for me as a person who has never involved himself with those substances. I'm just like, no, like the structure of fungus seems like that's good, and they're like, no, dude, just eat the mushrooms that make you see shapes weird.
Yeah, just try posting about it though. Like if you post about mushrooms as I do, the amount of like psilocybin mushrooms bots, or psilocybin gummies, or psilocybin, hairdos. I don't know, but it's all,
Yeah. It's so funny. It's like psyops on top of psyops, right? They made the psilocybin illegal because they didn't want you to learn whatever that molecule has to teach you, and then they put a whole bunch of influencers on the online to make you not want to do it, because it just looks like it makes you annoying. They gave every tech bro an ayahuasca retreat for free when they joined the Illuminati, so that nobody would ever want to do hallucinogens again, and it worked for me. That was a joke, in case anybody was. I don't think the Illuminati is a thing that hires tech bros to go to ayahuasca retreats. I said that too straight voicedly, and it made me nervous for a second, so I just felt like that. But yeah, I guess that's kind of a running theme throughout all your books, right? Is this sort of looking at these little organisms, these weird little guys, and kind of seeing how community looks like that. And I guess I just summarized what we've spent the last 10 minutes talking about, but I do like how in Skull Slime Tentacle Witch War, it does kind of narrow things down from that perspective onto just like a found family, rather than kind of broadening it out like it does. The stakes of this little group of weird little guys becomes incredibly high, but it is also just like, what happens when you become friends with your neighbors and meet the people in your community. Like, sometimes you might have to do some weird stuff, and maybe you're not ready for it, but this is what living in a society is like.
Yeah, weird stuff will happen to you for sure. And that's part of too, like what I don't know, one of the things that I think is important about it is that I know it sort of happens to an extreme, maybe cartoonish degree, but I hope it works, is that everybody is also transformed in a way by what happens, but they are still very, they are still themselves in a way, like, where that, I like playing with that sense of identity, and there's this sort of this group where they have, who they are sort of vis-a-vis each other, and how they change and their relationships change, and and again, they're just trying, and and things just keep getting worse, and just that feeling of, I don't know. There's a one way that you can do things that, like, where like things like seem like they're like when terrible things are happening, right? There's you could feel just the total like futility, or you can just like be like trying to do things, and trying to do things does not necessarily mean things work out. And that this is, and this was a very purposefully, Leech Girl Lives was a sort of was a dystopian, novel, and the Mold Farmer was a post-apocalypse. This is you actually you go through the apocalypse in this one, and that was important to me for that to sort of be how for it to present an experience of that.